Everything you write on your social media, it's impacting. Be careful what goes in your social media. My community, I want to be a hero to them. What's your divine purpose? What are you blessed to do? What are your gifts? What are you supposed to do?
Who's got my back?
I got your back!
Your number one job is to pick them up and change their perspective.
We're in a new series called As You're Going, and this is a 4-week series where we're taking a look at missions, right? And for me, I grew up as a missionary kid internationally abroad, and so like you, when I think about missionary or missions or Matthew 28, which we looked at this last week, I think missionary, like abroad, that person on my fridge that maybe, you know, that you got the magnet there and you pray for them and your family supports them. Or I think about like a missions trip, right? And you can like go internationally, you can go abroad. 11-12, my wife yesterday left for a country called Ecuador, place I grew up. How messed up is it that she's there without me, huh? You know what I'm saying? It's like going to your hometown for the first time without the person that grew up in that hometown. It's like, this doesn't make sense, but I get to go with her in 2 weeks. I'm stoked, and missions trips are awesome. There's this experience that you get to go and you get to see something out of your context, and yet we as 9th graders, we as 10th graders, without necessarily the opportunity to stamp our passports on a weekly basis, what does it look like for us to respond to Matthew chapter 28, where a risen Jesus looks at his disciples? It gets written down, so it's Bible, which means we are to respond to it. And he says, "Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you." And then he ends it with, hey, guess what? I'm going to be with you always to the end of the age. And I love that it's bookmarked, right? With Jesus saying, all authority is mine, and I'm going to go with you. All authority is mine, and I'm going to go with you. Anybody like March Madness fans in here? Anybody watching March Madness? Okay, like 3 of you, cool. Sports. And so I think about this Great Commission like somebody telling me, hey, you're going to go up and you're going to play against some of the best college students in the nation in basketball. Like, it's going to be you, Austin. And I'd look at that and I'd be like, wait, what? Like, I'm going to get dominated, right? Like, I like basketball, I like sports, but I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get dunked on real fast. Like, I'm going to get a fool made of myself. And yet, imagine if somebody said, hey, you're going to go out there and you're going to play against them, but you get LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, James Harden, right? Like some of the best NBA players in the league, you get to have them with you. And it's like, oh, like that's a game changer, right? I get to now play with the best players, even though the task is massive, I have them with me. I love that Jesus says that. He's like, here's a massive task. And I can imagine his disciples going, wait, did you just say all nations? And he's like, uh-huh. And then he ends it with, guess what? I'm going to be with you always. Always. I'll always be with you. John chapter 16 says that Jesus looks at his guys and says, it's better for you that I go away, that I leave. It's better for you. Why? Because then I can be with you always. And I can be with the follower of Jesus who's in China and Africa and Eastern Europe and South America and down in Ecuador. I can be with you always through the person of the Holy Spirit, baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We have this triune God, and the Spirit is what is with us at all times. And today, Heather and I want to take a look at that Great Commission, and we want to say, okay, I get it. I understand that we're commissioned, that we're called out into the world to make disciples, but what does that mean for me? What does that mean for freshmen in high school? What does that mean for sophomore in high school? How do I respond to that? And really, this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, is taking Scripture, reading it, and then going, okay, I hear that, but how? Right? I hope that at the bottom of every single one of your note sheets and every single page in your journal, you have this yes, but how? Or you have these so what moments all around. My boys in my life group, I probably till I'm blue in the face will say, so what? So what? So what? So what? Because they can give me the right answer. I can ask them a question, they can give me the right answer, but I'll look at them and go, so what? Like if it doesn't make a difference in how we do Monday and how we do Tuesday and how we do Thursday, if it doesn't make a difference, then what are we doing? How are we walking in obedience? So first and foremost, with discipleship, it has to start with you. Okay? It has to start with you. So point number one, as you're taking notes this morning, just write down, it has to start with you. Hey, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31 says, this is Paul talking, he says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble. I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that many will be saved. And then he says this in chapter 11, verse 1, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. And this verse has been incredibly convicting and challenging to me this week as I've read it. Because I wonder how many of us would be comfortable with saying that. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So let's just take a look at me, right? Austin Payne. I get to spend, 4-6 hours with you guys a week, maybe. If you come to like everything, if you went to Saturday night service, all of Sunday morning services, Wednesday night services, maybe like 8 hours. That's not all of the hours in a week. That's not even close, right? We're skipping Monday, Tuesday, most of Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. What would it look like for me to be comfortable with walking up to you saying, hey, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ in every part of my life, in my entertainment decisions, in the music that I listen to, and how I react to my parents when they ask me to do something I don't want to do, in what I do when I'm really angry, when I'm stressed out, when I'm hurt by other people, right? In my social media, in what I look at when nobody is watching, in my finances, in everything that I do. And I don't think Paul says this as like this convicting piece to make us feel shame or guilt. But I think it is one of these spur-on moments of, man, would we be comfortable if somebody like walked you around? How many of you watch The Office? Right? It's this awesome show, right? But it's this kind of weird approach to television that nobody had done before The Office, where it's kind of like documentary style, where they're just like following them around with cameras. What if you had a camera crew with you at all times, every place you went, like late at night, early in the morning, at your school, with your family? Would you be comfortable saying, follow me like I follow Christ? See, the heartbeat of discipleship has to be you first. If you yourself aren't being made into a disciple, we have no business making disciples. It has to start with your obedience, your own personal walk with Jesus. You got to love him first before we can then go out and make disciples.
So as we're learning what it means to be a disciple in your day-to-day life, I just wanted to give you 2 things on what discipleship isn't. So the first thing is discipleship isn't a solo thing. How many of you guys have seen the documentary Free Solo or heard about it? Yes. So Free Solo, if you haven't heard about it, it's this guy named Alex Holland, and he had been a rock climber his whole entire life. He started at the age of 10 climbing in a gym, kind of like Vital and Oceanside, and developed this love for rock climbing. He had these like people that he looked up to who had climbed specific mountains or rocks or something like that before, and he wanted to conquer what they had already done and move even further than that. So this documentary is about him climbing El Capitan. And if you guys have any idea of what El Cap is, it's this big, huge rock. It's like a slab of granite, though, so it doesn't have any crevices in it. It has a crevice probably about as thin as these pencils or pens. And so he climbed about 3,000 feet of just straight granite, but he climbed it without a harness and without a rope and just with his hands and feet. So do you think that he did this on his own? No, I mean, he climbed this rock on his own, but leading up to that, he had people around him, training him, waking up early with him and studying and climbing and hiking so many different places. He said in his documentary, before he went and actually took on this rock, he studied it for about 2 to 3 years, and he actually attempted to do it a couple times and then was like, no, it's too scary. He didn't do it. But he had people around him who said, hey, I'm going to go with you a couple days before, and I'm going to climb some of it with a harness and a rope with you so that we can take out some of those rocks out of the slab of granite so that it can be easier for you to climb. And so what he had with him was he had people around him. It might have been his own rock to climb, but he had people with him supporting him. And this is what your relationship is like with Jesus. This is what discipleship is. It might be your relationship with him, but you need people around you to prepare you for what's to come in your relationship, to walk with you alongside of you in good times, in bad times. We become disciples with one another. It's not a solo thing, and we learn how to love God, and we learn how to love each other, but we also learn to challenge each other in your relationship with Jesus and be with each other every step of the way. So the first thing is discipleship is not a solo thing. The second thing is that discipleship is not about you. And I think this one stings for me the most, honestly, because in my pride and just a moment of vulnerability here, when I disciple girls and when I meet with them, I walk away going, man, that felt so good. I did such a good job. Praise to me, right? But it's not about me. If I'm making discipleship about me, I'm doing it completely wrong. Discipleship is about pointing people to Jesus, not making a name for yourself. So John 3, if you want to turn there with me, we're going to be in verse 25. I'll give you a little background while we're turning there. In this passage that we're about to read, we're talking about John the Baptist, and the context of it is John the Baptist was there to prepare a way for Jesus. He had disciples who he was teaching about this Messiah that was going to come, and when Jesus did come and started his ministry, John's disciples saw Jesus baptizing other people, and they said, wait a second, what's going on? Aren't you jealous of this? Like, this Jesus guy is coming to baptize people, and that's your job. And he's like, no, you're getting it wrong. It's not about me. It's about Jesus. I'm not jealous of him. I'm excited for him. So we're in chapter 3, verse 25, and it says, now a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing and all are going to him. John answered, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. So how many of you guys have been to a wedding before? Yeah? How many of you have been a maid of honor or a best man in a wedding? Holla. Okay, so this is what John is talking about. When John's disciples are getting all upset and riled up about Jesus baptizing people, John goes, wait a second. He gives us this analogy of a wedding. He says, I'm not the bride. I'm not the groom. It's not about me. I'm like the best man. I'm like the maid of honor. I'm the one who's so excited for this friend who's going to stand by his side. I'm preparing the way for them. I'm arranging a lot of the details. I run the bachelor party, the bridal shower. I take care of the rings. I do all this stuff. But when that bride turns the corner and everyone's looking at the groom to see his reaction for the bride, I'm smiling right next to the groom. I'm so excited for them. But anytime I make it about myself, it's not my wedding. It's not me. And he tries to make this analogy and this example for them to understand that Jesus, I'm doing all of this in preparation for Jesus to come and step in and fulfill the prophecy of being the Messiah. And so John in this situation is pointing people to Jesus. He's saying it's not about me. And so if you guys are in the middle of a discipleship relationship and you are getting frustrated that people might not be understanding Jesus when you're discipling them, and you're getting frustrated that, why don't they get it? You're making it about yourself. Let's try, what would it look like if we tried to approach discipleship in a way that doesn't make us greater, that doesn't make it about ourselves, but we actually become less and make it about Jesus.
I love that we get these pictures in Scripture, right, of things that we can grasp, things that we can understand. Like, we've all seen a movie that has a wedding in it, or we've been a part of a wedding, or we have attended a wedding. And imagine just like, put yourself in that scene, right? Like you're sitting in the audience and the bride's walking down and the best man's standing there and the bride walks up to the groom instead of the best man and the best man's like, wait, what? I thought this was my wedding. And we all in the audience go, awkward, right? Like awkward turtle in that moment of like, this is the worst. Like you just feel awkward for him. If you're standing there and the woman's walking down the center aisle and you're like, oh baby, it's my wedding day. And then she walks up to another dude, you go, yikes, bro. Like, that's a big L right there. Like, I'm sorry. Like, you're big mad, right? Like, this is the moment where you're exhaustedly, like, you feel so awkward for that person. And this is where John's disciples are like, John, aren't you mad? Aren't you upset that they're all going to Jesus? And John goes, it's not about me. Like, I've known from the beginning, it's never been about me. And I think there's some of us that walk through life thinking that life is about us. And maybe we don't declare that. Maybe we don't like hold up this sign that's like, it's about me. But like the way that we talk, the way our social media is, the way that we act, like our pride gets in the way and we think it's more about us than anything else. And what John's getting at here is he says, I must become less, he must become greater. Is he's asking the question, is your life more like a neon sign, like pointing to Jesus? You know those like blinking neon signs? It's like, we're open, we're open, we're open. It's trying to get you to, it's catching your attention. Does your life look more like a neon sign pointing to Jesus or a mirror that says like, look at me, everybody, like look how great I am? Do we bring ourselves glory more than we bring God glory? And this next step in discipleship, as we talk about, it's not a solo sport. It's not about you. How many of you have heard the quote before? It's by a guy named Francis of Assisi that says, preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. Preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. Or maybe you've heard it said before of like, well, I don't really talk about Jesus. I just kind of live it out. Like I just, through my actions, through the way that I am, like people know that I'm a Christian because I'm different. Like I'm not as bad as other people at school. And maybe you've heard this concept before. I know I've talked to plenty of Christians who live this way. And there's a part of it that's true, right? There's a part of this that's like, okay, James chapter 2 talks about our faith and our deeds, that they have to line up. Right? If like a guy walked in here and he was freezing cold and he was starving and he walked out and I was like, hey man, like go in peace, be warm and filled up. But I didn't give him anything. Like we didn't give him a blanket or a coat or anything. And like we had tons of food, but we were just like, hey, go in peace, man. He'd be like, you literally did nothing for that guy. Right? And so James chapter 2 says like what we say we believe, and the way that we live our lives, they have to line up. Right? James chapter 2 talks about our faith is made complete by our deeds. And so there's a part of this that says, preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. That's talking about the way that we talk and the way that we live, it has to line up. And yet, there's something about the gospel that is words. Like if we just live a certain way and never actually use our words to talk about this word gospel means good news. Good news. You guys said learner, because I say disciple, it means... Discipleship means learner. There you go. Gospel means good news. Boom, nailed it that time, okay? Gospel means good news. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are called the Gospels because they're talking about the good news of who Jesus is. So the only problem with saying I live it out is if we use that as a crutch or if we use that as an excuse of why we don't ever talk about Jesus, that is in and where the issue comes. Hey, Romans chapter 10, verse 14 says, how can they believe if they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? Hey, if you sit in this room and you would call yourself a Christian, that's because you've responded to Romans chapter 10, where it says, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, master of your life, and you believe that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Somebody had to tell us about who Jesus is. Maybe it was at a camp, maybe it was a life group leader, maybe it was your parent, but somebody used their words to walk you through the gospel. and say, there's a different way. You don't have to walk in this shame and in this guilt, like because of the cross, because of who Jesus is. They use their words to talk about this. And Romans 10:14 is saying, how can anybody be saved unless they hear? Right? If I'm just a good person and I help the old lady across the street with her groceries and I help her up the stairs and I smile at her every day and I'm really good to her and I never cuss at her or anything and I do all these things, but I never talk about Jesus, by me helping her with her groceries, does she know anything about Jesus? No. I've met some incredible people across the world that do things with the Peace Corps and things like that are living out these incredible lives. And yet without the words of the good news of Jesus, it falls short. We meet a physical need without the spiritual need that all of us as eternal beings have to have through the good news of Jesus. The gospel is inherently words. We must use our words if we're to live out the Great Commission to make disciples. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. Always be prepared. Okay? Again, as I ask the question, how many of us would be comfortable with the phrase, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ? Say you are living differently. You're living a life that begs the question of why are you doing things so differently? Why do you live this way? And at that moment, the door is opened for a conversation about Jesus. If I walked up to you and I said, Gavin, you live differently. Tell me about why? What is it? In that moment, do you shake in your boots and go, this is the perfect setup, right? Fastball down the middle for a conversation about Jesus. Come to church. I know a guy named Sean. He'll talk to you, right? Is that how we respond? Which, friends, hear me loud and clear. That's not a bad response. It's why we do church. I hope this is a place, if you go through Fuel for 2 years and never invite anyone here to Fuel 910, that would break my heart a little bit. If this isn't a place that we feel comfortable bringing people in and say, hey, come check this out. Come be a part of my life group. That should be our response. But are we prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have within? And I love this. He ends it with, but do this with gentleness and respect. Gentleness and respect. You know what that means? It means we're not cramming Jesus down someone's throat. It means we don't look at someone and go, you don't believe in Jesus? What an idiot. Have fun in HE double hockey sticks. Gentleness and respect is what we're supposed to be marked by as Christians. Gentleness and respect. And yet, unfortunately, I don't think that's the first thing that comes to mind when non-Christians think about Christians. If you walked up to somebody that you knew had nothing to do with church and said, what are the first 2 words that come to your mind when you think Christian? Is it gentleness and respect? Doubtful. Okay? Last one, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20 says, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We are therefore God's ambassadors, okay? Let's talk about politics for a second. Some of you just went, ugh, and some of you went, oh, yay, for the first time ever, okay? Politics. In the U.S., you have what are called ambassadors. So I grew up in Ecuador. There was an ambassador to the U.S. in Ecuador. There was an ambassador's house. Every 4th of July, they threw this huge American party with hot dogs, hamburgers. They actually had Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew, all these things you couldn't get in Ecuador, and it was the best, okay? Because an ambassador is a representative of another country in a foreign country. So ambassadors to the U.S. that live in other countries, they represent the United States of America in a different country. Make sense? Tracking with me? Yes? So the ambassador in Ecuador represents America. Hey, say I walked up to the ambassador in Ecuador and he had an American flag tattoo on his forearm. He had that American flag shirt, the button up, you know the one I'm talking about. And he's barbecuing hamburgers and he's got In-N-Out socks on and you're like, this dude is America. And he's like, wait for the fireworks, y'all. Okay? And he's the representation, the GOAT when it comes to America. He all the music he's listening to is all America this. He's got American flags everywhere and you're like, I think this dude's American, right? It's kind of obvious. And yet you walked up to him and okay, can you tell me about some foreign policy of the U.S. or what their deal is with immigration right now? Or can we talk about the 3 branches of government, the separation of church and state? Can you help me understand the Declaration of Independence and the Civil War and who was America, where did they come from, all these things. And he went, ooh. Like, I don't know about those things. Like, let's talk about, like, obviously I'm American, look at me. And I think we treat Christianity that way sometimes, where we hear, we are Christ's ambassadors. And you're like, look at my church attendance. Look at my cross that I wear around my neck. Look at my Christian tattoo. It's in Hebrew. Like, I'm a super Christian. And yet, when it comes to being prepared for the hope that lies within, with gentleness and respect and the ability to speak the gospel, we go, yeah, I don't know about that. So as disciples, are we ourselves being made into disciples? Are we surrounded by a community? This isn't a solo sport. Are we prepared to give an answer for the hope that lies within? God's making his appeal through you. How are we doing with that?
Okay, I want you guys to draw something like this on your paper. It's just like a big cross with arrows on all sides. And this is going to help you understand that discipleship is 360 degrees. It's all around. Discipleship is up, down, and across. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of what that looks like in my life and in the Bible, and then how it can apply to you. So discipleship upwards is someone who is older than you, someone who is wiser than you, who has more knowledge of the Bible and is very mature in their walk with Jesus. For me, this is a lady named Natalie Lambrisi. She works over in 1112, and she's been discipling me for about 3 years now and walking with me in my relationship with Jesus. Something about an upward discipleship is you want to ask someone to disciple you who is someone you would want to imitate, because they are most likely, if you're choosing them, they are imitating Jesus. And so you want to learn how to imitate Jesus as well through imitating them. A biblical example for this is Ruth and Naomi. If you guys don't know the story about Ruth and Naomi, Naomi had 2 daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Oprah, and both of their husbands died. And so Naomi goes, look, your husbands are not here anymore. Go back to your family. One of them goes, and Ruth says, no, I'm going to stay. Where, and this is where you find the verse, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. And she chooses Naomi to disciple her upwards. This is her upward discipler, Naomi. And Naomi pours her wisdom into her for the rest of her life. They journey to Bethlehem together. And then Naomi soon speaks wisdom into her life in choosing a husband. Luke 6:40, you guys can write this down. It says, a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. Discipleship upwards is someone that you want to be trained to be like so that you can pour into someone else one day.
Yeah, that's good.
The next one is discipleship downwards. And for me, this is someone named Reagan. I met her when I was working in 1112, and she was a junior. Now she's out of high school and college. And I've been walking with her in her relationship with Jesus and her maturity as well. With her, she came to me and said, I would love for you to disciple me. I see you as someone wise. And I was like, thank you. And I want you to mentor me and disciple me in my relationship with Jesus. For Reagan and I, my role is not to save her. My role is not to bring her to salvation, but my role is to walk with her and correct her and teach her in her relationship with Jesus. An example of this in the Bible is Paul and Timothy. If you know anything about Paul and Timothy, he mentored him, he discipled him, he encouraged him, empowered him to fight the good fight, and he directed him towards his goals in ministry. He poured into him what he knew. Titus 2:1-8 talks about being a model of good works and teaching and training someone below you. And this is what downward discipleship looks like. It looks like taking someone younger than you that you can pour into everything that you've learned and be a model and example for them. The last one is the across. And this one is probably something that applies to you more than the other ones. Relevance in your school. But for me, this is a girl named Katie and a girl named Shara. So I have 2 across. And these are girls that I do life with all the time. And we are in a discipleship relationship. We hang out with each other. We see each other often. And we talk about our walk with Jesus and what's going on in our life. For you guys, this is people around you. This is Christian or non-Christian, because if you have a Christian friend, you guys are equally pouring into each other and discipling each other through that. But also discipleship is with a non-Christian too, who you might say, I would love you to know Jesus. And so I'm going to drip that in our daily relationships and in our lives. I'm going to disciple you in that way. Hebrews 10:23 through 25. You can write that down. It says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promises faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as it is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day draw near. Across discipleship is meant to be together. You're not supposed to do it alone. You encourage each other and you meet together consistently. I'm going to make a note to all of this 360 discipleship. This needs to be the same gender. You guys might be thinking of people in your head that apply to these right now that might be the opposite gender, and I'm just going to save you some time right now and say it needs to be the same gender. You need to be in discipleship relationships with people who are interacting with you every single day and who are the same gender, because you get to share things that you can't really share with the other gender. You get to walk through things and you're growing very close together. The only exception for this is in marriage and in family. If you have a younger brother who you're like, what? I can't decide. No, you can disciple your younger brother. If you have a dad or an uncle, or, sorry, I'm talking like that because I'm a girl, but opposite gender, that's okay. That's an exception because you're constantly pouring into each other as family. But you might be asking yourself, what if I'm the only one? Like, what if I'm the only girl that, what if I'm the only person in this guy's life, or what if I'm the only person in this girl's life who knows Jesus? No one else is going to get to them. Well, I just think that the second we think that to ourselves, that I'm the only one, we're putting God in a box and we're not allowing him to work. We're just saying, nope, God, I don't think that can happen. I'm the only one. But the answer is not to ignore them and just be like, well, guess they're not ever going to get discipled. It's to place them in the right area to be discipled. It's, hey, come to 910, come to Fuel on a Wednesday night. I'm going to plug you in with Sean and Austin or Sarah and Heather or some of the guys and girls in this ministry, and you are going to get placed in an environment where you can grow in your relationship with Jesus. And so what I want to leave you guys with is, who is this person in your life? Who is your upward? Who are you looking to mentor you in discipleship? Who are you deciding to pour into? And then downwards, younger than you. And then who are those people on that cross line who you guys can pour into each other daily?
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. I love that the Bible makes a distinction between the wise person and the fool. And you know what the number one distinction is? Is the ability to be teachable and to gain more wisdom. When we wake up and we think to ourselves, I'm actually wise enough. Today I have arrived at wisdom. That's the moment where the Bible would call us foolish. It's the moment where we refuse to learn more. We refuse to be taught more. When we refuse to be teachable, it's our own pride saying, I'm actually good. I'm all right. And so that cross is so important. And I hope as you're taking notes that you etch that down. If you're not, grab your friend's pen, write that on your hand, and ask yourself the question this week, who's pouring into me? And then who am I pouring into? It's so important that be either your life group leader, it could be an older sibling, somebody that you say, I want to be like that. I have those people in my life that are further down the road that I say, hey, can I just ask you hard questions? Can you keep me accountable? Can you do life with me? And then I have those people that I then turn and do a lot of life with. 3 important qualifiers for discipleship, and we're going to close with this, we're going to end with this here, is 3 important qualifiers. 1 is relationship. Okay, kind of obvious, but important. 2 is proximity, maybe a little less obvious. And 3 is time. Okay, relationship, proximity, and time. The reason relationship is important, probably one of my favorite phrases I've learned here at North Coast Church is relationship is the bridge that truth travels over. Hey, how many of you have ever been corrected before on something? Hey, somebody walks up to you and they correct you on something in your life and they're like, hey, I don't think you should be doing it this way, or don't think you should have said that. That interaction changes drastically if it's somebody that we have trust and relationship with, and it's somebody that, or if it's somebody that just like we met today, right? Like if somebody you just met, or somebody that's like a very fringe relationship walks up to you and is like, I think you should do this, this, and this differently. You're like, who the frick are you? Like, you don't know me. You don't know my life, right? Like, worry about yourself, person. But if somebody walks up to you that there's a lot of relationship with, a lot of trust, a lot of time spent, and we can walk up and say, hey, I think you should do this differently. It still hurts. It still might sting. But because there's the relationship there, the truth can travel through conversation. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, number 2 is proximity. Okay, I had a mentor named Rich Baker, and he is one of the most legendary human beings I've ever met in my life. I've done a ton of life with him, known him since I was 12 years old. And when I was living in Newport Beach, before I moved down here to take this job, I was doing a lot of life with him. I was over at his house at least once a week. We played a lot of video games together. We'd stay up till like 2 a.m. playing the same stupid level of Call of Duty over and over and over again. And we just would do life. That's the most excited you've ever gotten in a message, Adrian, okay? Just kidding, my guy. Okay, we would do a lot of life together. We would spend a lot of time together, and not all of that's like us sitting down going like, yeah, so tell me what God's like doing it. Like, no, a lot of it's just we're going to the ocean, we're hanging out with his 2 kids, we're eating meals together, we're just doing life. And proximity matters because, for example, Carrie and I, if I hang out with Carrie, I'm not going like, hey, dude, how's your life been for the last year? No, I'm going like, hey, how's your life been since I saw you 2 days ago? Like, 2 days ago, we talked about this and this that you're struggling with. How's it going with that? The proximity there, now that I've moved away from Rich Baker, I live an hour and a half away. It's not even that far. But every time I see him now, we have months to catch up on, not a couple days. Does that make sense, the difference there? So in our minds, when we think about discipleship, who we're being discipled by and who we're discipling, if it's your cousin on the East Coast, there might be relationship there. But if there's no proximity, that becomes infinitely more difficult. That's why the church exists. We get plugged into a church. We do a lot of life with one another. That cousin on the East Coast, and what does it look like to get them plugged into a church? That's our encouragement, that there's relationship, there's proximity. The last one is time, okay? All of you in this room that are 9th graders or 10th graders, you were born after 1996, which makes you Generation Z, right? Generation Z. I'm a millennial, was born in 92. For the millennials, our average time, what's the word I'm looking for? Attention span, thank you. Our average attention span for a millennial is 12 seconds, okay? 12 seconds. Average attention span for Gen Z is 8 seconds, okay? And now, before you go like, woo, yeah, we suck, there's something in here that's actually really cool. In a lot of the research that's being done about attention span, it doesn't just mean that you're goldfish, that you're like ADD, like, something new. It's our ability to take in information and decipher what's important and what's not important. You guys are really good at that. In a Snapchat generation, we're 10 seconds max. Like, we can take in information really quickly on a lot of different fields. You can have your iPad, your phone, and your computer open all at the same time and go, I know what's going on in the world. The shadow side of that is if you're anything like me, and if you're on a YouTube video and it buffers for more than 5 seconds, you're like, next, right? Like, we're over it. On an Instagram, as I'm scrolling, if that little white circle takes just a second too long, I'm over it. I'm on to the next one. The danger of that when it comes to discipleship is if we have a relationship or somebody that we're walking through life with or someone we're being discipled by and we don't have immediate results, as Gen Z, as millennials, we start getting frustrated and going, I'm on to the next. I'm over it. Why is my life not changing now? Why am I not seeing my friend come to Jesus and have this radical life change that I had? It takes time. I love that Heather talked about Reagan. How many years have you been discipling Reagan? 3 years that they've done life together. Time, proximity, patience, conversation. And of that 3 years, it's not like it's all sitting down, like talking about the depths of your soul. Like Carrie and I would talk about this being a cross-discipleship relationship. So much of what we do, we hang out and surf. We'll surf for like 3 hours and just like get out of the water and be like, yeah, we had maybe 15 minutes of good conversation, but the rest of it, we're just hanging. Right? We do coffee together. We hang out. We have a lot in common. And so there's a lot of discipleship that happens. With your friends at school, on your sports teams, and your family, don't feel like every time you have to hang out, you have to go, so let's talk about Jesus. Like, where have you been at with that? It's like, no, be normal. Like, what interaction is like that ever? It's not. Do life with somebody, and then as proximity and relationship happens, as you yourself focus on being discipled, we will naturally make disciples, not just by living at it, not just by preach the gospel at all times and only when necessary. No, we need to be prepared to give an answer for the hope that lies within. We are Christ's ambassadors, but it takes time. It takes proximity. It takes relationship. It's not a solo thing. It's why we do Fuel 910. It's why we do life groups. It's why we do what we do. Okay, if you felt like I was talking a million miles an hour today and that like Heather was trying to get all this information, it's because we were. As we message prep for this, it's like there's so much here on discipleship because it is the essence of what it means to be a Christ follower. It's me, myself, becoming a disciple and then turning around and making disciples. This is the tip of the iceberg, as they say. Friends, we set up this conversation so that we can walk out these doors and go into our life groups on Wednesday night and talk about discipleship. I hope this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. Thanks for taking notes. There's a ton of you I see trying to keep up with me and Heather and going, okay, cross, yep, 360, got it. Time, proximity, okay. Okay, this is why we go to life groups and go, okay, so what? Yes, but how? Let's be people that have the courage to walk out of here and go, okay, that's me. I want to live that out. How? These are the conversations we want to start. Make sense? Yes? Let me pray for us and then